Please welcome Senator Sharif Street.
Good morning. I feel the need to apologize. We're driving here, we missed the exit, and then because of the construction got in the inside lane, and so we're delayed a little bit, but I'm told it wasn't that big an issue. It's a great segue though, because the GPS, as accurate as it wasn't able to tell us that you had to be on the inside lane and not the outside lane because of the construction. And so, yeah, I guess we got into what was functionally an express lane, although it did not express our trip. And you know, it makes for an interesting segue into this discussion about what the city of Philadelphia and smart cities are attempting to do. One of the things that the very ambitious plan that the city is undertaking, and Philadelphia perpetually has in front of it ambitious plans for utilizing and integrating technology. And one of them is to do a data map of what's really going on in the city, which would include things like construction and changes to the roadway that might not be picked up by Google Maps. And because that information will be publicly available, programs like Google Maps or Waze or other things that people are navigating would have that information available, and it would make the technology that we're already using that much more effective when navigating urban terrain, which can often change in ways that technology doesn't anticipate. We're talking about data mapping of services as well. And the integration and the interconnection between those things can be really significant to what a visitor or a potential company that wants to locate in the city, what the introductory experience is like. Imagine if when you got on your GPS, you not only were able to access and understand what road closures were, but what the routes of trash trucks were, which if you go into the wrong neighborhood in a city like Philadelphia or New York, getting behind trash trucks can significantly delay your travel, as they tend to span out in single neighborhoods on certain blocks all on the same day. So you'll find massive amounts of congestion, for instance, in the neighborhood I live in near Temple University on Wednesday mornings that wouldn't exist on a Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, or Friday because of the network of trash trucks that are moving around. And you know, if you live in an area, you might have some idea where they're likely to be because they're somewhat on schedule. But if you didn't and you were visiting, and say you were a visiting company that had an interest in locating your business in Philadelphia, and some of the resources you need to access were near Temple University, having access to that information would be significant. It could also be significant and determinative of whether you felt that congestion was something you could handle, and whether you ultimately wanted to locate your business there. Because if you were only in the city for one day, and the congestion and the ability to move was literally reduced by 50% because of your experience with trash trucks, you might have an impression of the city in that area, in my district, that is inconsistent with what you would normally experience. But having that information available could be helpful. It could also be helpful to people who are just coming to visit as tourists or just coming to drop off children to school. And we want those folks to feel like Philadelphia is a user-friendly city. And as people increasingly interface with cities through technology, much in the way I was interfacing with Harrisburg, for whom I'm no stranger, through my technology, having that information available is helpful. But it's also helpful to people who are neighbors, who might be wondering if because of a snowfall and an adjustment in the week's schedule, they should put out their trash the night before, or who needed to access some kind of government service or apply for an application or even apply for a job. That information tends to be available online, and to the extent that you understand that you have a fully integrated platform with that information, it could be significant and helpful. But we're not just talking about the mere integration of public sector entities. The plan is ambitious enough that it includes the full integration of major private sector stakeholders, and they're particularly some of the utility companies, and that would include fully private sector companies like Comcast and Verizon, and their ability to interface with government and make sure that those resources are available as well. One part of the plan I thought was particularly interesting, and my children would laugh about, was the availability of kiosks, so that if you don't have a tablet or a smartphone to interact with, you can still interface with the government in a digital way. And in the cities, and like many of our cities, where there are barriers in terms of just economic barriers to having the most up-to-date technology, having those kiosks can be helpful, and it can also be helpful to seniors who may not have it. And finally, I will point out to some of my millennial friends, and I'm a father to a few millennials, who seem to always have access and understand how to use the best technology, but seem to drop it and break it regularly. Having a kiosk available for one of my daughters after they've smashed their phone could also be helpful, as they would, I'm sure, would laugh at me and say, "Who would need to use a kiosk when we've all got phones?" I would say, "Yeah, babe, until you drop it and break it." and then need to interface with the technology and the information. I will say this: this is a journey. Philadelphia, during my father's tenure as mayor. For those of you who don't know, my father was mayor of Philadelphia from 2000 to 2008, and a councilman for the 20 years preceding that. Decided that we wanted to make Philadelphia the first wireless city, and we started to build out Wireless Philadelphia, which ultimately did not happen. But the spin-off ideas around the integration of technology and to how it could impact the folks' lives spawned a whole set of ideas, which ultimately subsequent mayors have used, and now we have the ambitious plans that are not so much focused on broadband access, which is a significant issue in many of our rural areas, but more how do people use and leverage the technology that exists. And so, if I move along with this process, some of the other things that we have, the other applications, it would allow for people who have complaints about government, who there's a pothole and you want to report it. Traditionally in Philadelphia, that meant you went down and found your local city council person's office and either told somebody or wrote up a piece of paper, or maybe made a phone call to a line that was perpetually busy. To the extent that you could submit that through a text message or an email, that not only went to your council person, but also to the city agency and department that was relevant. And then if you go that, and then one challenge people often find is you go down to City Hall, wait, see a council person's constituent services rep about a pothole, explain the whole situation about the pothole, only to be told that's a state road and you need to go find your state senator or state representative because the city doesn't fix that one. It's a lot simpler if you can go online and access that information, and you haven't had to do that kind of waiting. And if there's and it would allow for a certain level of information sharing. One of the projects that the city implemented a few years ago was integrating our technology systems where the sheriff's office and the courts could talk in a more seamless way. Something you'd think would be fairly simple, but presented some significant challenges, as both had incumbent systems that didn't particularly speak to one another in a real way. What's happened is government has technologically grown up in silos. And so while all of us who operate in government from the outside, and I spent more time operating with government as a private sector person than a public sector one, think of it as the city or the state or the federal government. But that's not the way agencies often have thought about themselves. Somebody would say, I work for the water department, or I work for the streets department, or I work for the Department of Human Services, and so on and so forth. And so often the procurement for technology systems was done on an individualized basis, because people were really thinking about it like, do I buy this piece of hardware or this piece of hardware, which might vary significantly from a worker whose job requires him to sit at a desk most of the day, or somebody who's out in the street. But when it migrated, and government procurement of technology migrated away from merely purchasing hardware to software that could be integrated, that operating in silos became problematic as platforms were built in systems that didn't particularly talk to one another well. And as we start talking about making government more user-friendly, those systems have to talk. So one of the things that the city of Philadelphia began to undertake was a process by assessing what do we have, what are the various levels of technology, what are the systems, and what are the challenges involved in making those systems talk to one another so that you can really operate in a fully integrated platform. That continues to go on. There's also feedback and input that has been from major stakeholders, institutional stakeholders as well, that might be operating as part of that integrated platform. And then finally, you don't want to build out a platform and find it's not what people want. So you have to do market surveys. Market surveys when you're a for-profit company, as you figure out who your customers are, you survey them. When the public sector, that took the form of a sequence of community meetings that are ongoing in order to receive data not only about how technology should be integrated, but what are the things that people are interested in. Philadelphia has expanded bike lanes, which are quite popular in some sectors of the city, but are the bane of some people's existence in other sectors of the city. What would be the appropriate locations for them? How can you make roadways safer? The Route 1 through Philadelphia, locally known as Roosevelt Boulevard, is the most dangerous piece of highway for pedestrians in America. As an 8-lane strip of highway that doesn't know whether it's a highway or it's a city street, and therefore has still traffic lights for people to cross it, but has probably evolved into about a 8 or 10-lane highway at some places, and with medians where people can sort of stand on in between if you don't make it all the way across. There are more vehicle striking pedestrian accidents on that strip of road, which in part goes through my district, than any other strip of road in the country. Figuring out how we can coordinate traffic lights in a way that doesn't frustrate drivers as much, gives pedestrians more time to cross, are the kinds of things that you can also do. Data from the fact that we have cameras at most of those intersections and collecting the data from those things so we can see what traffic patterns look like. And it's not just about how many red light tickets the city can collect in revenue, but looking at it in a more integrated way. And one of the things we're looking at. And as we talk about cameras are having an increasing role in collecting data and providing services. Increasingly in the city of Philadelphia, the camera network that is often and primarily employed by private sector companies is leveraged by the police department. And there's technology that allows that system to be, in some cases, remotely accessed by police. So if you have a bodega or a corner store in Philadelphia and you have cameras there, the city is working with you to figure out how to integrate your system into it so that the police can monitor that. A significant number of crimes are actually solved now because the Philadelphia police can access footage in places and in locations where the city doesn't have cameras, but cameras do exist. So as you move towards a fully integrated model, you can have it. One of the challenges were that most of the private sector cameras put in there are networked in ways that make it fairly easy to access that information. The real challenge were the cameras that the city put up for traffic purposes were a little bit more challenging to access the data and the information on that than the cameras that were put up by the private sector. But the first step is you have to understand that those challenges exist, what they are, and what is a fully integrated network. So there's a certain amount of asset mapping. Ultimately, when people go on, asset mapping just isn't where the technology is, but where are things that people want? What are the parks and the information from parks and recreation? And we have these Indigo bikes that you can go rent and ride in Philadelphia. Where are the kiosks for those things? Can you rent them remotely? Can you reserve one? using a credit card. And if you're going to a park or a playground, what are the hours in that, and how does that integrate face with the zoo? Suppose you want to rent a bike in Philadelphia down by the Art Museum and ride up along the historic and beautiful Boathouse Row up towards the zoo. What are the hours of the zoo, and can you do that from a single platform? So if you're visiting, you can have a more simple and integrated experience. This is the ultimate goal, and the challenges that are involved in that are numerous. And so what the sort of three phases. One, what are we trying to do? I think that there's been a roadmap and a plan that is available. And it's a 25-page PowerPoint presentation the city's made available that you can look through at your leisure. Two, how do we get stakeholders invested in this in a way, including community? And then three, accessing, building out the infrastructure and technology. And then, of course, the final step would be testing, using, and updating. And that's the basic roadmap and the basic plan. And so with that, I think I've talked for a little bit, and I'll reserve some time for maybe some questions.
You won't be staying for the entire day, so...
No, not the whole day.
People have any, because the way we organized this event was that all the presenters will be staying, and we'll have question answer expert panel at the end. But please feel free to ask, because Senator may have to leave.
Yeah.
So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask.
The plan that you're discussing, is this public knowledge, and is it really like a annual plan or a 5-year plan?
So the plan was announced. So what I did was sort of give you the evolution of how we got to where we are. The plan as the current edification of the plan would have been something that the Kennedy administration announced in 2017, and it's been building on that. But that plan leveraged resources from and ideas from previous administrations. So the current plan that's publicly available would give you a history dating back to 2017. And we're building, and I think has a sort of completion date, if you will, of 2021.
And I don't know if there's any relationship, or I'm sorry, or any work that we could do together, or anything that you'd be looking for input from academia or others to help bring that alive?
Well, look, from my perspective, the more stakeholders that participate, the better. Obviously, I'm not the mayor, I'm a senator. Mm-hmm. But I think that the vision of the city would be to have as many participants operate and weigh in as possible. Ultimately, I'd like to see a statewide integration of services. There are some challenges around that, as some sectors of the Commonwealth still, in the rural areas, still need additional broadband build out. And if you had a state plan, then it would also probably allow us to access some of our healthcare infrastructure, which is more state infrastructure than city infrastructure, and include telemedicine components. But I think the ideas in the minds of academia, which are certainly the Philadelphia-based institutions are engaged, are helpful, and I can't imagine that anyone wouldn't welcome your input.
Do you have a recommended contact point, or someone that I, for instance, could make contact with to learn more?
So I don't know who the appropriate person for you to interface with from the city, but if you call my office and speak with my policy director, Micah Majubian, he can be helpful. The best number to reach him at is right this time of year, my Philly office at 215-227-6161, and when we're in session, you can reach him at the Harrisburg office.
Okay, great, thank you.
All right, and Micah has some significant level of familiarity with the city plans and city integration, as he serves as policy director for me now. But during the street and mayoral administration, he was deputy policy director for the city of Philadelphia when my father was mayor.
And I think I echo that, because we have a very large number of design firms, integration firms, academia. We have people from Penn State, Harrisburg, University of Science and Technology, Shippensburg. So these are areas of interest to all these people.
Absolutely.
So I think,
And if folks have an interest in participating or getting additional information or looking at a point of contact, feel free to use my office as the point of contact. And I apologize for not knowing which person at the city you should interface with, but I'm not sure who the public-facing contact for the city is. I know people inside the city, but who you in contact with from the government to government is a little different than who the general public contacts.
Great. Any more questions?
Thank you for coming today, first of all. Really appreciate it. And what you're talking about is wonderful. There's also a significant amount of infrastructure that you have to build out before you can achieve some of the benefits of this. When you're trying to drive policy and to build support behind it, what kind of challenges are you running into with other members of the state Congress, and how do you get past that?
So this is one of those things I think both at the state and the city level, everyone in a room like this would stand up and agree on. And then when we actually start trying to do it, there will be a tremendous number of challenges and differing ideas. So at conferences like this, we sound very united and bipartisan from a Harrisburg perspective, and the city would sound as united as well. And then when you get into the weeds, it becomes more challenging. I will say this. This is the kind of thing that it's easy for elected officials to agree on because it doesn't really impinge upon our turf in any real way. It is the kind of thing that if you're a manager in a department of a city, it can be incredibly frustrating as the way you have developed doing things can be significantly challenged and integrated. So I would say the real challenges tend to be within, and then those folks who are helpful to elected officials then call their contacts in government that are elected and push and ask and sort of implore us to push back or slow down. But from a theoretical standpoint, what legislator, Republican, Democrat, urban or rural, doesn't want? Greater access to services, increased efficiencies. Those are things we all talk about. But if you're working in the in the streets department at the city level, Department of Transportation at the state level, and people are talking about modifications to your system to make it to interface better with the Convention and Visitors Bureau, and you're saying, I'm dealing with major stuff and you're worried about tourists and I got commuters that need to get home. And there could be challenges internal challenges that if it done right aren't seen by the public, but you're asked to divert 15, 20% of your staff's man hours in the technology sector to creating some integrated platform with the people who are dealing with tourism and commerce and marketing. And you want to just dedicate all your time to making sure that you're dealing with your plan for snow and ice. Those are the kinds of things that I think are most likely to slow down a plan like this. It's not the senators and representatives or council people or mayors. This is stuff that's relatively easy for us to agree on because it doesn't impact our daily lives. It does impact the lives of the people who run the day-to-day operations of departments in a very significant way, even to the point of, okay, so you come up with another system that from a theoretical standpoint is just as good as another system, but you have to retrain your folks on it because that's not the one that they're used to using, and you don't think it's a problem. I'll give you an example. How many people in here use iPhones as a regular basis? All right, how many people use Android phones? How many people would be interested in, at the drop of a dime, swapping to use the other one? I've got one or two people, but most people don't want to switch from an iPhone to an Android because you have to learn a completely new operating system in your daily life. That's sort of what we're doing to people that work in government. And for them, it's a little challenging. So, when I got elected, I've always been an Android guy, and my policy director, Mike, has always been using Apple. And we had, we talked about documents. Fortunately, it got better and we found platforms to communicate, but he didn't really want to move to that and I don't want to move to the other. You find that at a much larger level in a much more significant way inside of these groups where you've been using a platform that works well for your purposes. Somebody else has been using a different one, making those programs talk to each other in a fully integrated model sometimes means somebody has to give up the system that they're using and work on a different one, and then that requires training. And if you don't, and if the metrics by which you're evaluated don't appropriately reflect that integration and training, then there's not an incentive system for you to do it. And so oftentimes, for instance, people evaluate PennDOT and the streets department at the city level who work well because they're all sort of in the same silo, right? On is trash picked up, are potholes filled, and are the roads plowed for snow and ice? Are the street lights on? That's pretty much it. If you're asking them to do something that will ultimately allow tourists and commerce to jobs to be created in an area, that's not really, if I'm the manager of a particular area, how I'm evaluated. Okay, so we brought in more jobs, but I was less efficient on clearing snow and ice. I'm not evaluating my personal job performance on job creation. That's the commerce director. So I'm taking time to help that guy look good. And me, I'm going to look bad because I wasn't as prepared about snow and ice, but he looked good because he brought in some jobs. And I think breaking through those barriers are the real challenges. But for senators, we can all stand and say, yay, everybody's integrated. We created jobs. Or we can also take credit for snow and ice. Because ultimately, this is where your elected officials' influence is helpful. You know, people, generally speaking, we interfere in government to make it less efficient. We are helpful is in this, the fact that we both get the burden and the blame of everything that happens. When you're elected, nobody really cares whose problem it was. There was a problem. You're an elected official, and you didn't do anything about it, and the public, and there's no way to hide from it. So we end up getting land blasted together. And so for stuff like this, we also get the praise together. So there's a job created, even if you guys created it totally without us, we show up to the ribbon cutting, take pictures, and everybody thanks us. So we are the one group of, so there's some benefit to that, right? Because we are the people who are invested in the economy doing well. For instance, they're talking about an economic dip. All incumbents will be more likely to get voted out of office in 2020 if the economy does poorly, because that's just statistically true. The incumbent president is fretting over it, but every incumbent member of Congress is also not particularly happy about it unless they're in super safe districts, because people tend to just throw all the bums out when things aren't going well and keep everybody in when things are going well. And so we're incentivized, in a sense, to have collective good happen. But the people who work for government are only evaluated on specific metrics for specific sectors. And when you have an fully integrated system, the problem is many of the people who have to make sacrifices of time and energy may not be appropriately evaluated in the metrics for their own job performance. Any other questions? That was a rambling answer. Hopefully you made a point.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your question and participation.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.